At the airport, my wife's sister said, "He can't even afford economy." My wife laughed as they boarded first class. I waited quietly until a man in uniform said, "Your jet's ready, sir." The entire platform froze. Look, I'm not saying airports are the seventh circle of hell, but I'm also not saying that. There's something about the fluorescent lighting, the overpriced bottled water, and the general aura of collective misery that really brings out the best in humanity. And by best, I mean absolute worst. Especially when you throw in-laws into the mix, because apparently God looked down at airports and thought, you know what this needs? More judgment and passive-aggressive commentary about your life choices. So there I was, standing in Terminal 3 at JFK, watching my father-in-law Harold complain about literally everything within a 50-foot radius. The man had opinions about the carpeting, the font on the departure screens, and, his personal favorite, the types of people who dare to share oxygen with him in public spaces. His voice, which I can only describe as what a kazoo would sound like if it developed a superiority complex, cut through the ambient noise of rolling suitcases and crying babies like a hot knife through butter that nobody asked for. "These delays are absolutely ridiculous," Harold announced to nobody in particular, though his voice carried far enough that I'm pretty sure people in Terminal 5 could hear him. "It's always because of the budget airlines. They let just anyone fly these days. Poor people clog up the whole system." I wish I was making this up. I really do. But Harold genuinely believed that economic inequality was something that should be aggressively enforced at 30,000 feet, and that anyone flying economy was personally responsible for his mimosa being delayed by 8 minutes. My wife, Bella, God, where do I even start with Bella, was standing next to me, but might as well have been on a different planet. Her face was illuminated by the cold blue glow of her iPhone screen, thumbs moving at superhuman speed as she scrolled through Instagram, double-tapping photos of people she claimed to hate, but religiously followed anyway. Every few seconds, she'd let out this little exhale of air through her nose. Not quite a laugh. More like the sound a deflating tire would make if it was judging someone's outfit choices. Then there was Clara, Bella's sister, strutting about 15 feet ahead of us like she was walking a runway in Milan instead of navigating the grimy corridors of an international airport. The woman was wearing 6-inch heels, and I'm not exaggerating here. I'm talking stilts that would make a circus performer nervous, that looked like they'd been specifically designed by Satan's personal stylist during a particularly vindictive mood. Each step she took sounded like a tiny hammer hitting the floor, announcing her presence like some kind of designer-clad town crier. Her carry-on luggage probably cost more than my first car, and she made sure everyone knew it by the way she kept adjusting it, making sure the logo faced outward at all times. Clara suddenly stopped, causing a minor traffic jam of confused travelers behind her, and turned around with this smirk on her face. You know the kind, the expression that says, "I'm about to say something that I think is clever but is actually just mean, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it." Her perfectly glossed lips curved upward as she looked me up and down like I was a disappointing clearance rack item. "Hope you're not flying economy again, Leo," she said, loud enough that several nearby passengers turned to look. "You really can't afford to look that broke next to us. I mean, seriously, what would people think?" And then, because apparently the universe decided I hadn't suffered enough, my wife laughed. Not a polite chuckle or an uncomfortable giggle, but a full-on laugh that suggested she found this absolutely hilarious. She looked up from her phone just long enough to pile on. "He's used to it, Clara," Bella said with this dismissive wave of her hand, like she was swatting away a particularly annoying fly. "He likes sitting with the regular people. It's his thing. Very authentic. Oh, fantastic. Regular people. You know, the ones who do crazy things like pay taxes, hold down jobs, and experience human emotions that don't revolve around designer handbags and Instagram likes. The absolute nerve of them, existing in the same general vicinity as the blessed trinity of my in-laws." I stood there clutching my old leather duffel bag. And yeah, it was old. And yeah, it was worn. But it was also genuine leather that had developed character over the years, unlike the personalities of the people currently mocking me. This bag had seen the inside of more hotel rooms than my marriage had seen genuine moments of affection lately, which was saying something. It had traveled with me through 3 continents, survived being thrown by careless baggage handlers, and still had all its zippers intact, which was more than I could say for my patience at this particular moment. But here's the thing I'd learned over the past 2 years of being married into this circus. Arguing with narcissists is like trying to teach a goldfish advanced calculus. It's pointless, exhausting, and at the end of the day, the goldfish still thinks it won because it successfully swam in a circle. So I did what I always did. I smiled. Just a faint little smile, the kind that could mean anything from, "I'm fine with this," to, "I'm planning your demise in excruciating detail." The beauty of ambiguity. I'd learned that silence absolutely terrifies narcissists. They feed on reaction, on drama, on getting a rise out of people. When you don't give them that, when you just stand there with a calm expression like you're contemplating what to have for lunch, they start to panic. It's like watching a computer try to divide by zero. You can almost see the mental blue screen of death happening behind their eyes. Clara and Bella were still giggling, holding up their first-class tickets like they were golden tickets to Willy Wonka's factory. Except instead of chocolate, they were getting access to slightly wider seats and free drinks that they'd brag about for the next 6 months. They waved those tickets around, making sure everyone in the terminal could see them, practically doing a choreographed dance routine about their elevated status. I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for my own amusement, but quiet enough that they couldn't quite hear. "Hope the champagne pairs well with your bad decisions." Maybe they heard me. Maybe they didn't. Honestly, at that point, I was fine either way. I'd reached that zen-like state of not caring that usually takes monks decades of meditation to achieve, but I'd managed to speedrun it through repeated exposure to toxic family dynamics. Call it a gift. They didn't react, too busy adjusting their designer sunglasses indoors like a couple of celebrities who'd mistaken Terminal 3 for the paparazzi gauntlet at LAX. Harold was checking his Rolex for the 17th time in 3 minutes, as if the watch face might magically reveal to him why the universe insisted on making him wait like a common peasant. I just stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, watching the departure board, watching the crowd, watching my in-laws perform their elaborate theater of superiority for an audience that largely consisted of exhausted business travelers who couldn't have cared less. And here's what they didn't know. What they couldn't possibly have known because they were too busy measuring everyone else's worth by their seat assignments and credit card limits. The real show hadn't even started yet. Not even close. They thought this was it. That this moment right here, with them flashing their first-class tickets and me quietly standing with my beat-up duffel bag, was the final scene. The closing credits. But see, that's the thing about underestimating people. It's a dangerous game, especially when you're too blinded by your own perceived superiority to notice what's actually happening around you. They were so convinced of their narrative. Poor Leo, struggling Leo, can't afford first-class Leo, that they'd completely missed the plot. I glanced at my watch. Not a Rolex, just a simple, reliable timepiece that told me exactly what I needed to know. It was almost time. Almost time for the moment when their entire worldview would shift on its axis. Almost time for the schadenfreude I'd been patiently waiting 2 years to experience. The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing boarding for their flight. Clara squealed, actually squealed, like a teenager at a boy band concert, and grabbed Bella's arm. Harold straightened his blazer, preparing to grace the aircraft with his presence. And me? I just smiled a little wider, my grip relaxing on the duffel bag. I wasn't worried. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't even particularly annoyed anymore, because I knew something they didn't. And in about 3 minutes, they were going to know it too. If there's one thing I've learned about people who fly first class for the first time in their lives, it's that they will absolutely, without question, make it everyone else's problem. And by people, I specifically mean Bella and Clara, who were currently treating Gate 42 like it was their own personal photo studio, complete with an invisible red carpet that only they could see. I'm talking full-blown fashion shoot here. They'd positioned themselves at the perfect angle where the afternoon sunlight was streaming through the terminal windows, creating that golden hour glow that Instagram influencers would literally commit crimes for. Bella had her phone out on a selfie stick. Yes, a selfie stick. In the year of our Lord 2025, because apparently some trends refused to die with dignity. While Clara struck poses that looked like she was auditioning for America's Next Top Model, Airport Terminal Edition. The pout. Oh God, the pout. You know the one. Lips pushed out like they're trying to kiss an invisible lemon, eyes half closed in what I guess is supposed to be smoldering intensity, but actually looks more like aggressive constipation. Then came the chin angles, with both of them tilting their heads at approximately 45 degrees because someone on TikTok told them it was slimming. They cycled through about 17 different variations of fake laughter. Those performative, oh my gosh, we're having so much fun, giggles that sound like wind chimes being tortured. Click, click, click. The sound of Bella's phone camera was like a machine gun firing rounds of manufactured happiness into the void of social media. Between every shot, they'd huddle together to review the photos, offering critiques like they were curating an exhibition at the Louvre. Delete that one, my arm looks weird. Do another. I'm blinking. Wait, let me fix my hair. Okay, go again. This went on for a solid 15 minutes. Actual human minutes that I will never get back. Watching two grown women try to capture the perfect image to post with the inevitable caption of #FamilyGoals or #blessed or some other hashtag that made me want to throw myself onto the baggage carousel. Meanwhile, other passengers were trying to navigate around them, shooting annoyed glances that Bella and Clara were either completely oblivious to or simply didn't care about. I'm betting on the latter. Self-awareness wasn't exactly their strong suit, which probably explains why they thought this entire performance was normal human behavior. I was standing off to the side, becoming one with a support pillar, just trying to exist in my own quiet space of resigned acceptance. That's when I felt it. The heavy, condescending hand of my father-in-law landing on my shoulder like a sack of wet cement. Harold leaned in close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the airport coffee on his breath, which was about as pleasant as you'd imagine. His voice had that particular tone that people use when they think they're being encouraging, but are actually just being patronizing as hell. "Leo," he said, giving my shoulder a squeeze that I think was supposed to be supportive, but felt more like a subtle reminder of his dominance in the social hierarchy. "Maybe next year you'll join us in first class, eh? You know, if your little projects ever start making real money." Ah yes, my projects. That's what Harold called them, always with this little dismissive chuckle, like I was a 10-year-old with a lemonade stand instead of a grown man running an actual business. The air quotes were invisible, but I could feel them hanging in the space between us like toxic particles. See, in Harold's world, and by extension, in the world of Bella and Clara, real work meant wearing a suit and tie every day, sitting in an office with fluorescent lighting that slowly killed your soul, attending meetings that could have been emails, and generally making yourself miserable in the pursuit of looking important. The fact that I ran a software company, that I worked from home in comfortable clothes, that I actually liked my employees and treated them like human beings instead of replaceable cogs in a corporate machine, that didn't compute. That wasn't real work to him. I could have explained, for probably the 100th time, that my company was actually doing quite well. I could have mentioned the contracts, the clients, the steady growth, the fact that I'd built something from nothing while he'd inherited his position from his daddy's connections. But what would be the point? Harold had already decided who I was in his mind, and no amount of evidence to the contrary was going to change that narrative. So instead, I just nodded politely, keeping my expression neutral, and said, "Sure, Harold. Right after you figure out how to work your email without calling IT support 17 times a day." Clara, who'd paused her photo shoot long enough to catch the tail end of our conversation, let out this shrieking laugh that could probably shatter glass in a 3-mile radius. She thought I was joking, making some kind of self-deprecating humor about the generation gap, or whatever. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth in that exaggerated gesture of amusement. I wasn't joking. I was dead serious. The man literally had a post-it note on his computer monitor with step-by-step instructions on how to attach a file to an email. But sure, I'm the one who doesn't do real work. Harold just smiled, that smug, satisfied smile of someone who thinks they've won an argument that they didn't even realize was happening. He patted my shoulder one more time before walking away to join his daughters in their ongoing documentation of their superiority. The gate agent's voice came over the intercom, announcing that first-class passengers could now begin boarding. You would have thought they'd just announced that Bella and Clara had won the lottery based on their reaction. They actually squealed, both of them, in harmony, like some kind of demented dolphin chorus. They grabbed their designer carry-ons, adjusted their sunglasses that had somehow migrated back onto their faces despite being indoors, and started prancing toward the first-class boarding lane like gazelles who'd just discovered Pilates. But not before Bella turned back to look at me one more time. And oh boy, here it came. I could see it forming behind her eyes before the words even left her mouth. The final dig, the last little twist of the knife, just to make sure I knew exactly where I stood in the pecking order of her universe. "Don't embarrass yourself trying to upgrade, Leo," she called out, loud enough that several nearby passengers definitely heard. Her tone was sweet, almost sing-songy, which somehow made it worse. "Just stay in your lane, okay? It's better that way. For everyone. Stay in my lane." Like I was a Honda Civic trying to merge onto a highway dominated by Maseratis. Like knowing my place was some kind of virtue that I should embrace. Like the natural order of things demanded that I remain beneath them, looking up in admiration at their purchased superiority. I watched her standing there, first-class ticket held up like a trophy, her sister beside her wearing an expression that said, "Yeah," what she said, and Harold behind them both with his arms crossed like some kind of discount godfather. The three of them, united in their conviction that they were simply better than me by virtue of, what exactly? The ability to pay extra for a wider seat and free champagne? And you know what? In that moment, I could have gotten angry. I could have caused a scene. I could have let them know exactly what I thought about their little hierarchy of worthiness. But that wouldn't have been nearly as satisfying as what I was about to do. So instead, I just smiled. Not a fake smile or a forced smile, but a genuine, calm, knowing smile. The kind of smile that says, "Oh honey, you have no idea what's coming." I looked Bella right in the eyes and said, in a voice that was perfectly measured and completely chill, "Don't worry, babe. My lane has wings." She blinked. Clara tilted her head like a confused puppy. Harold's eyebrows furrowed slightly. They didn't get it. Of course they didn't get it. How could they? They were too busy being impressed with themselves to notice anything beyond their own reflections. Bella just laughed it off, that dismissive little laugh she did whenever I said something she didn't understand or didn't want to acknowledge, and turned back toward the gate. The three of them walked away, boarding passes in hand, ready to enjoy their 3 hours of premium service and mediocre airline food served on actual plates instead of in plastic containers. I stood there, watching them disappear down the jetway, and checked my watch again. Just a few more minutes now. Just a few more minutes until their entire worldview imploded like a poorly constructed sandcastle at high tide. I adjusted the strap on my duffel bag and allowed myself a small chuckle. They thought they knew how this story went. They'd written the script in their heads years ago. Leo the underachiever, Leo the disappointment, Leo who would always be scrambling to keep up with them while they sailed through life in first class, both literally and metaphorically. But here's the thing about scripts. Sometimes the characters go off book. Sometimes the person you cast as the supporting role in your life's drama turns out to be the protagonist of an entirely different story. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you spent years underestimating has been quietly building an empire while you were busy taking selfies. They'd find out soon enough. Real soon. And I was going to enjoy every single second of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text message, right on schedule. "Ready when you are, sir." I typed back a quick response, slid the phone back into my pocket, and smiled at the departure board. Showtime. You know that moment in movies when everything suddenly goes quiet? When the background noise just drops away and you can practically hear everyone's heartbeat because something massive is about to happen. Yeah, that was about to be my life in approximately 3 seconds, and I was absolutely ready for it. The gate agent had just called for Bella, Clara, and Harold's boarding group. Row numbers were being announced over the speaker system in that distinct monotone voice that all airport employees seem to develop after their first week on the job. My lovely in-laws were gathering their things, doing one final check of their phones to make sure they hadn't missed any crucial Instagram notifications in the last 90 seconds, preparing for their grand entrance into the first-class cabin where they belonged, where the universe had clearly intended them to be. Clara was in the middle of adjusting her Chanel bag, because of course it was Chanel, and of course the logo was facing outward, and of course she'd positioned it so that maximum people could see it. Bella was touching up her lipstick using her phone camera as a mirror, because apparently the 15 layers she'd already applied weren't quite achieving the desired effect. Harold was straightening his tie, puffing out his chest like a peacock about to display his feathers. And that's when it happened. "Mr. Donovan, your jet's ready, sir. We'll begin pre-flight whenever you're ready." The voice came from directly behind me. Firm, professional, crisp, and most importantly, loud enough to carry across the entire boarding area like a divine proclamation from the heavens. It was the kind of voice that commanded attention, the kind that made people instinctively stop what they were doing and turn to see what was happening. I'm talking dead silence. Like, you could have heard a pin drop on carpet. The entire gate platform, which moments ago had been filled with the ambient noise of rolling luggage, crying babies, people arguing about overhead bin space, and the general chaos of modern air travel, suddenly went absolutely, completely, utterly silent. Time didn't just slow down, it pretty much stopped. I swear I could see individual dust particles floating in the air, suspended in the moment like they were waiting to see what would happen next. Clara froze mid-selfie, her phone still held up at that practiced angle, her mouth literally hanging open in a way that was definitely not Instagram-worthy. Her finger was hovering over the screen, stuck in the motion of tapping, like someone had hit pause on her entire existence. The perfectly curated expression she'd been working on for the past 5 minutes melted away, replaced by pure, unfiltered shock. Bella's head snapped around so fast I'm surprised she didn't give herself whiplash. Her boarding pass, which she'd been clutching like it was the deed to a small country, started trembling in her hand. Just slightly at first, barely noticeable, but enough that I could see it from where I was standing. Her eyes went wide, and I watched in real time as her brain tried to process what she'd just heard, like a computer trying to run software it wasn't equipped for. Harold's face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion. Disbelief. More confusion. A hint of panic. Back to disbelief. It was like watching a really intense game of emotional charades. The officer who'd spoken, and let me paint you a picture here, was tall, easily 6'3", dressed in an immaculate dark suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His posture was military-grade perfect. He was holding a sleek leather folder, the kind that screamed important documents inside. And his expression was completely professional, completely neutral, like announcing that someone's private jet was ready was just another Tuesday for him. Which, to be fair, it probably was. He gestured smoothly toward the private terminal, the movement so practiced and refined it could have been choreographed. "Your car is waiting, sir," he added, his tone carrying just the right amount of deference without being obsequious. This was a man who knew exactly how to treat high-value clients, and he was treating me like I was one of them. Because, well, I was. The silence stretched on. Someone's phone alarm went off in the distance, and the owner frantically scrambled to shut it off, the electronic beeping seeming obscenely loud in the otherwise quiet terminal. A baby started to cry somewhere behind me, but even that seemed muted, like the universe itself was holding its breath. My father-in-law was the first to find his voice, though voice might be generous. It came out as more of a strangled croak, like a frog that had just witnessed something that fundamentally challenged its understanding of reality. "Jet," he managed to squeeze out. As in A. He couldn't even finish the sentence. His brain was clearly trying to reconcile the image he'd built up of me. Struggling Leo, unsuccessful Leo, economy class Leo, with the words he'd just heard. It was like watching someone try to force a square peg into a round hole, except the peg was the size of a shipping container and the hole was the size of a quarter. I took a moment. I really savored it, let it marinate, because opportunities like this don't come along every day. I could feel every single eye in the boarding area on me. Passengers who'd been minding their own business were now openly staring. The gate agents had stopped what they were doing. Even the janitor who'd been emptying trash cans had paused mid-motion. I turned to face Harold fully, maintaining eye contact, and smiled. Not a smirk, not a grin, just a polite, pleasant, perfectly calibrated smile. The kind of smile you'd give to someone who'd just asked you an innocent question about the weather. As in the kind that doesn't have seat 32B, I said, my voice casual, conversational, like we were discussing what I'd had for breakfast. You know, the kind where you don't have to worry about legroom or middle seats, or whether someone's going to recline into your lap. That kind of jet. The murmuring started immediately. People started whispering to each other, leaning in close, shooting glances between me and my in-laws like they were watching a tennis match. I could hear fragments of conversations bubbling up around us. Is that guy famous? Oh my God, did he say private jet? Who is he? Wait, I think I recognize him from somewhere. Phone started coming out. Not even subtly, just straight up pointing at me. I saw at least 3 people open their camera apps, probably preparing to document this moment for their social media feeds. Some teenager off to my left literally mouthed the words, "That's goals," to his friend, his eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Bella tried to speak. I watched her mouth open, close, open again. She looked like a fish that had just been pulled out of water and was trying to figure out how to breathe air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she managed to form words, though they came out shaky and uncertain. "Leo, what is this?" Her voice cracked on, "What?" which would have been satisfying enough on its own, but the look on her face, that mixture of confusion, shock, and dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd severely miscalculated something, was worth more than every snide comment, every dismissive laugh, every condescending pat on the shoulder I'd endured over the past 2 years. I straightened my jacket, taking my time with it, making sure the collar sat just right. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt significant. Like I was physically adjusting more than just my clothing. I was adjusting the entire dynamic of our relationship, the power structure that had been assumed for so long. "You were right, honey," I said, and I made sure my voice was loud enough for the growing audience to hear. Clear, confident, with just a hint of amusement dancing around the edges. "I can't afford economy. It's too cramped for my standards now. You understand." Clara made a noise that sounded like a small animal being stepped on. Harold's face had gone from its normal ruddy color to something approaching the shade of copy paper. Bella just stood there, frozen, her first-class boarding pass hanging limply from her fingers like a surrender flag. I turned to Officer Grant. Yes, the same Grant who used to work in my company's IT department before I promoted him to Director of Executive Security, because I believe in taking care of people who are loyal and competent. What a concept, and gave him a small nod. "Let's go," I said, projecting my voice just enough. I hate being late to my own plane. The emphasis on own was subtle, but in the deadly silent terminal, it landed like a bomb. I could practically feel the collective gasp, though it was more of a psychological gasp than an audible one. The energy in the room shifted, crystallized into something electric and charged. Grant nodded once, crisp and professional. "Right this way, sir." As I picked up my duffel bag, that same beat-up leather bag that Clara had mocked not 15 minutes ago, which suddenly seemed a lot more vintage chic than pathetic, I took one last look at my in-laws. They were still standing there, the 3 of them clustered together at the gate entrance, first-class boarding passes in hand, surrounded by other first-class passengers who were now looking at them with something between pity and amusement. The tables had turned so completely, so absolutely, that I almost felt bad for them. Almost. "Enjoy your flight," I called back over my shoulder, giving them a friendly wave like we were old friends parting ways at a casual brunch instead of witnessing the complete demolition of their superiority complex. I hear the snack boxes in first class are really coming up in the world, almost like real food. And with that, I walked away, following Officer Grant toward the private terminal, leaving behind the stunned silence, the whispers, the phone cameras, and 3 people who were finally beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, they'd been playing checkers while I'd been playing chess. Walking through the private terminal feels different than walking through a regular airport. And I'm not just talking about the obvious stuff like the marble floors or the fact that there's actual art on the walls instead of advertisements for credit cards and duty-free liquor. It's the atmosphere, the energy of the place. Everything moves slower because nothing needs to rush. There are no gate agents yelling boarding groups, no families sprinting to catch connections, no general sense of barely controlled chaos that defines the commercial aviation experience. It's quiet, peaceful, the kind of environment where you can actually hear yourself think, which is ironic considering I'd spent the last 2 years being told I didn't think enough about real success by people who were currently losing their minds back at Gate 42. The air in here even smelled different. Leather, expensive coffee, and what I can only describe as the subtle scent of having your life together. It was the olfactory equivalent of success, if success had hired an interior designer and a really good aromatherapist. Officer Grant walked slightly ahead of me, his stride confident and measured, occasionally nodding to other staff members we passed. A woman in an elegant uniform smiled warmly and asked if I needed anything. An older gentleman behind a mahogany desk looked up from his computer and gave me a respectful nod. This was a world where customer service wasn't performed with gritted teeth and fake smiles. It was genuine, attentive, and somehow made you feel like you weren't being a burden just by existing. We passed through a set of glass doors that probably cost more than most people's cars, and that's when I saw it, the lounge. And okay, calling it a lounge is like calling the Mona Lisa a painting. This place had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, plush leather seating that looked like it had been designed by someone who actually understood human anatomy, a full bar staffed by an actual bartender who wasn't pouring drinks from plastic bottles, and a spread of food that would make most restaurants jealous. But I wasn't here for the amenities, as nice as they were. I had a schedule to keep and a point to make. Grant turned to me with a professional smile that had just a hint of something else. Amusement, maybe, or satisfaction. See, Grant knew the whole story. He'd been there from the beginning, back when I was building skyframe systems for my living room, surviving on coffee and spite, coding until 3 in the morning while Bella complained that my keyboard clicking was keeping her awake. He'd watched me grow the company, watched me succeed despite everyone's predictions of failure, and he'd been loyal through all of it. That's why when I needed someone I could trust to head up executive security, someone who understood discretion and had impeccable timing, Grant was the obvious choice. Plus, he genuinely enjoyed moments like these. I could see it in the slight crinkle around his eyes. "Welcome aboard, sir," he said, his tone formal, but his expression telling me he was enjoying this almost as much as I was. "Jet's fueled and waiting. We can depart whenever you're ready." I nodded, feeling that familiar mix of satisfaction and vindication settling into my bones. "Perfect timing," I said, pulling out my phone. My wife's Instagram followers needed new content anyway, though I don't think this is quite what they were expecting. Grant actually chuckled at that, a low sound that he quickly covered with a professional cough. "Indeed, sir. Shall I escort you to the aircraft?" We walked out onto the tarmac, and there she was, my Gulfstream G650, gleaming white in the afternoon sun, the Skyframe Systems logo subtle but unmistakable on the tail. $65 million of aviation engineering, capable of flying 8,000 nautical miles without refueling, with a top speed of Mach 0.925. She was beautiful, powerful, and most importantly mine. The stairs were already deployed, red carpet running down them, because apparently my flight coordinator had a sense of dramatic flair that I deeply appreciated. The pilots were visible in the cockpit, running through their pre-flight checks. Everything was ready, waiting only for me. But I wasn't in a rush. Not yet. I climbed the stairs slowly, savoring each step, and entered the cabin. The interior was exactly as I'd had it customized, cream-colored leather seats that could fully recline into beds, burled walnut accents, a conference table for when I actually needed to work, a full galley kitchen, and a bathroom that was larger than some New York studio apartments. The lighting was soft and warm, the temperature perfectly calibrated, and my favorite playlist was already queuing up through the sound system. I sank into one of the seats, the leather embracing me like an old friend, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. This was it. This was the moment. 2 years of grinding, of building, of being told I wasn't enough, all culminating in this perfect instant of poetic justice. My phone was already out. I pulled up my pilot's number and sent a quick text. "Let's wait 5 minutes before we start taxi. I want them to see it take off." The response came back almost immediately. "Understood, sir. Taking our time. Because here's the thing about revenge. And yeah, I know people say living well is the best revenge, and they're right. But sometimes living well needs an audience. Sometimes the people who spent years making you feel small need to actually witness the moment when they realize just how wrong they were. Not because you need their validation, but because the universe occasionally demands that karma be served with a side of irony so thick you could cut it with a knife." I settled deeper into my seat and pulled out my laptop. Might as well get some work done while I waited for the show to begin. I had emails to answer, contracts to review, a conference call scheduled with our Tokyo office in an hour. The business didn't stop just because I was having a moment of personal triumph. Through the window, I could see the commercial terminal in the distance. Gate 42 was visible, though the people at it were just small figures from this distance. But I knew they were there. I knew that somewhere in that mass of humanity waiting to board a metal tube with recycled air and minimal legroom, Bella, Clara, and Harold were probably still trying to process what had just happened. Were they boarding yet? Were they in their seats, settling in with their complimentary champagne, trying to convince themselves that this was still a win because at least they weren't in economy? Or were they still standing at the gate, phones out, frantically Googling my name to try to understand how this had happened? I allowed myself a small smile. The beauty of it all was that I didn't actually need to know. The moment had happened. The scales had been balanced. Whatever they were feeling right now, shock, confusion, embarrassment, the slow dawning realization that they'd been complete idiots, that was between them and their own consciences. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie, my assistant. Just saw the video. Someone posted it on Twitter. You're trending. Hashtag private jet Guyon's in-laws is blowing up. I laughed out loud at that, the sound echoing in the quiet cabin. Of course someone had recorded it. Of course it was already online. This was 2025. If a moment of public humiliation or triumph didn't get posted to social media within 30 seconds, did it even really happen? I typed back. Please tell me someone got Clara's face. Multiple angles. It's chef's kiss perfect. I shook my head, still grinning. The universe really did have a sense of humor sometimes. The captain's voice came through the intercom, smooth and professional. Mr. Donovan, we're ready for pushback whenever you give the word. Weather's perfect, clear skies all the way to Manhattan. Estimated flight time 2 hours and 40 minutes. I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes had passed. Time to make an exit. Let's go, Captain, I said, pressing the intercom button. I've got a conference to get to. Roger that, sir. Beginning pushback now. The engines hummed to life. That low, powerful sound that you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. The jet began to move, pulling away from the terminal, heading toward the taxiway. I looked out the window one last time toward gate 42, and there they were. Even from this distance, even as small figures against the terminal windows, I could see them. 3 people standing at the window, clearly watching, clearly recognizing the Skyframe Systems logo on the tail of the jet that was now taxiing away. I raised my coffee cup, freshly brewed Ethiopian single origin, served in actual china, not a paper cup in sight, in a silent toast toward the window. To economy, I whispered to myself, my smile widening. May it stay affordable for the rest of them. The jet turned onto the runway, engines powering up for takeoff. Through the window, the terminal began to shrink, becoming smaller and smaller as we accelerated down the tarmac. And then we were up, the nose lifting, the ground falling away, the whole beautiful city of New York spreading out beneath us like a map. I settled back into my seat, pulled up my laptop, and got back to work. Because the thing about winning isn't just the victory itself, it's what you do after. It's proving that the success wasn't a fluke, wasn't luck, wasn't anything except hard work, intelligence, and refusing to let other people's opinions define your potential. Bella and Clara would land in Manhattan in about 3 hours, slightly cramped despite their first-class seats, having paid premium prices for the privilege. I'd be there in 2 hours and 40 minutes, fully rested, having gotten work done in complete comfort and quiet. And the best part? The conference they were flying to attend, the one they'd probably registered for weeks ago, excited to network and be seen at such a prestigious event. Yeah, that was my conference. My company was the primary sponsor. My name was on the building. They just didn't know it yet. But they would. Oh, they absolutely would. I took another sip of my coffee and smiled at the clouds passing by my window. Checkmate. You know what's funny about success? And by funny, I mean the kind of ironic, dark humor that makes you want to laugh and cry at the same time. It's that the people who doubt you the most are usually the ones standing closest to you. Not strangers, not distant acquaintances, but the people who are supposed to have your back, who are supposed to believe in you even when things look impossible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind the tape a bit. Take you back to where this whole thing started. Back when Bella and I were still Team Donovan. Before the team imploded and became more like Bella and her disappointment of a husband. It was 2 years ago, almost to the day. I was working at TechCorp Solutions, pulling in a solid 6-figure salary, doing cybersecurity consulting for corporate clients. It was stable, predictable, safe. The kind of job that made in-laws smile and nod approvingly at Thanksgiving dinner. I wore business casual, had a parking spot with my name on it, got decent benefits and 3 weeks of vacation that I never actually took, because corporate culture is basically a cult that shames you for having a life outside the office. But here's the thing, I was absolutely miserable. Like, wake up every morning and question your life choices level of miserable. The work itself was fine, even interesting sometimes, but the environment was soul-crushing. Politics, bureaucracy, meetings about meetings, entire days wasted on conference calls where nothing got decided. I was watching my life tick away in 15-minute increments on an Outlook calendar, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more than optimizing firewall configurations for companies that saw their IT department as a necessary evil rather than an asset. So I made a decision. I was going to leave. I was going to take everything I'd learned about corporate aviation systems, because TechCorp's biggest client was an airline consortium, and I'd spent 3 years deep in their infrastructure, and I was going to build something of my own. Skyframe Systems, a logistics platform specifically designed for private and corporate aviation, something that could revolutionize how the industry handled everything from flight planning to maintenance scheduling to real-time aircraft tracking. I had the technical knowledge. I had the industry connections. I had a vision for something that didn't exist yet, but absolutely should. And I had exactly $73,000 in savings that I was willing to bet on myself. When I told Bella, her initial reaction was actually supportive. I remember it clearly. We were sitting on our couch, the same couch where we'd planned our wedding, talked about our future, dreamed about what our life could be. I laid out the whole plan for her, showing her my business model, my projections, the market research I'd done. Her eyes lit up. She squeezed my hand, and she said, "Let's do this. I believe in you." That support lasted approximately 72 hours. By day 4, reality had apparently set in. Or maybe Clara had gotten to her. Or Harold. Or both. Probably both. The questions started coming, each one laced with just a little more doubt, a little more concern, a little more subtle implication that maybe I was making a huge mistake. But why risk stability? Bella asked over breakfast one morning, stirring her coffee with more aggression than the situation warranted. "We have a good life. Why would you throw that away?" I tried to explain that I wasn't throwing anything away. I was building something. That sometimes you have to take calculated risks if you want to achieve anything beyond comfortable mediocrity. That playing it safe your entire life is actually the riskiest choice you can make because you're guaranteed to end up with regrets. She wasn't convinced. And over the following weeks, as I put in my notice at TechCorp and started setting up Skyframe, the criticism intensified. "You're not like Clara's husband," she said one evening, scrolling through Instagram, showing me pictures of Brandon, Clara's husband, standing next to his new Tesla Model S, looking smug as hell in the driver's seat. He owns a Tesla. He has a real career at a real company. He's stable. Right. Brandon, the guy who worked in middle management at his father-in-law's commercial real estate firm, who'd had every opportunity handed to him on a silver platter, who thought cryptocurrency was a skincare product and had once asked me if the cloud was an actual cloud where they kept all the data. That was the standard I was being compared to. A guy who couldn't figure out how to unmute himself on Zoom calls and had to be walked through the process every single time. But sure, he had a Tesla, so obviously he was winning at life. The comparisons didn't stop there. Every family gathering became an opportunity for me to be reminded of my inadequacies. Clara's husband had bought a boat. When was I going to buy a boat? Bella's cousin had just gotten promoted to VP of something meaningless at a company that would probably be bankrupt in 5 years. Why wasn't I pursuing corporate advancement? Harold's friend's son had just bought a house in the Hamptons. What was wrong with our perfectly nice apartment in Brooklyn? It was exhausting, like being slowly suffocated by other people's definitions of success, none of which had anything to do with actual fulfillment or achievement, and everything to do with visible status symbols and impressive-sounding job titles. Still, I stayed calm. I kept my head down and worked. I worked nights after Bella went to bed, coding until 2 or 3 in the morning, surviving on coffee and the stubborn belief that I was on to something real. I worked weekends while she went on shopping trips with Clara, retail therapy sessions that seemed to happen with increasing frequency, funded by credit cards that I was still helping to pay off. I pitched my platform to potential clients, getting rejected over and over again before finally landing my first contract, a small charter company out of Newark that was willing to take a chance on my system. Then another client. Then another. Slowly, painfully, the business started to grow. But during all this time, while I was building something from nothing, proving that my vision had merit, the people who were supposed to be my family, my wife, my in-laws, even some of my friends, they all kept telling me I was going to fail. "This is too risky," Bella would say, barely looking up from her phone. "You should have stayed at TechCorp," Harold would remind me at every opportunity. "I don't understand why you're doing this to yourself," Clara would add, her tone dripping with pity that felt more like contempt. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had advice. And none of it was helpful or supportive or even remotely based on an understanding of what I was actually trying to accomplish. The worst part wasn't even the criticism. It was the casual dismissal. The way Bella would introduce me at parties. "This is my husband, Leo. He's doing a tech thing." It's complicated. The way she'd laugh along when Clara made jokes about my little startup. The way Harold would pat me on the shoulder and say things like, "Well, if this doesn't work out, you can always go back to a real job." A real job, as if what I was doing, building a company from scratch, creating actual value, employing people, solving real problems, wasn't real work because it didn't come with a business card from an established corporation. I remember one particularly brutal family dinner about a year into building Skyframe. We were at some overpriced restaurant in Manhattan that Harold had chosen because it was exclusive and had a wait list. Clara and Brandon were there, talking about their upcoming vacation to the Maldives. Bella was showing everyone pictures of a designer handbag she wanted to buy, price tag, for $1,000. Harold was going on about his new Rolex. And then Clara turned to me, wine glass in hand, and said, "So Leo, how's the startup going? Made your first million yet?" She laughed, and everyone joined in. It was a joke, you see. The idea that I could be successful was hilarious to them. I smiled politely and said, "Getting there. Just signed a major contract with Atlas Aviation Group." Silence. They didn't know what to say to that because they didn't actually know anything about my industry or what that contract meant. So they just nodded and changed the subject, moving on to more important topics like the thread count of the sheets at their upcoming resort. That was the moment I realized something crucial. They didn't want me to succeed. Oh, they'd never admit it, probably didn't even consciously acknowledge it themselves. But on some level, my success would be inconvenient for them. It would disrupt the narrative they'd built, the comfortable story where they were the successful ones and I was the well-meaning failure, the cautionary tale they could point to when talking about the dangers of taking risks. My success would force them to confront their own choices, their own fears, their own safe little lives built on inherited wealth and conventional paths. And that was threatening. So I stopped talking about the business at family gatherings. I stopped trying to explain what I was building or sharing my wins. I just smiled, nodded, and let them think whatever they wanted to think. Meanwhile, I kept working. 12-hour days turned into 14-hour days. I brought on Grant to handle IT security, then Sophie as my executive assistant. I landed contracts with 3 major corporate aviation companies. I developed partnerships with airports across the country. Revenue started climbing, not just surviving numbers, but thriving numbers, the kind that made accountants get excited. And through it all, Bella became more distant. She stopped asking about the business. She stopped pretending to be interested in my work. Our conversations became transactional, bills to pay, schedules to coordinate, the mechanical maintenance of a marriage that had stopped being a partnership somewhere along the way. The irony, the absolute comedy of it all. While they were busy shopping and brunching and posting filtered photos of their blessed lives, while they were flying first class on their twice-a-year vacations and considering it the height of luxury, I was quietly building an empire. The same family trip they were currently flying to, the Global Logistics Tech Summit in Manhattan, was being sponsored by my company. My company. Skyframe Systems was the primary sponsor. My name was on every piece of promotional material. My face was on the website as the keynote speaker. They'd registered for it weeks ago, probably saw the sponsor logos and didn't even make the connection because they'd never bothered to learn what my company was actually called or what it actually did. They were flying to a conference that I was hosting to celebrate an industry that I was revolutionizing in a city where I was about to be recognized as one of the fastest-growing tech entrepreneurs on the East Coast. And they had no idea. The schadenfreude was going to be absolutely delicious. Landing in Manhattan never gets old, especially when you're doing it in your own jet at Teterboro Airport instead of fighting for overhead bin space at LaGuardia. The descent was smooth as silk, the kind of landing where you barely feel the wheels touch down, and within minutes we were taxiing to the private terminal where my car was already waiting. No baggage claim. No waiting in line for a taxi while some guy tries to cut in front of you. No surge pricing on an Uber because apparently algorithms have decided that your desperate need to get somewhere is an excellent opportunity for price gouging. Just a smooth, seamless transition from air to ground, the way travel should be, but almost never is for normal people. I descended the jet stairs. Yes, they rolled out an actual red carpet again, because my flight coordinator clearly understood the assignment, and there she was. Sophie Martinez, my executive assistant, standing next to a black Mercedes S-Class, looking impeccable as always in a charcoal gray suit, tablet in hand, ready to brief me on whatever chaos needed managing. Sophie was 32, whip-smart, efficient to the point of being almost psychic about what I needed before I knew I needed it, and had a sense of humor dry enough to make the Sahara look like a rainforest. She'd been with me since year one of Skyframe, back when executive assistant meant person who does literally everything, because we can't afford to hire anyone else. Now she had her own assistant, but she still preferred to handle the important stuff personally. She grinned as I approached, that knowing smile that told me she was fully aware of what had gone down at JFK and was absolutely living for the drama. Big night, boss, she said, falling into step beside me as we headed toward the car. You're opening the Global Logistics Tech Summit at 7. Cocktail reception starts at 6. Press wants photos at 5:30. And guess who RSVP'd to the event? She paused for dramatic effect, eyebrows raised. Bella, Clara, and Harold. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Actually laughed, the sound echoing across the tarmac. Of course they did. Never miss an opportunity for free champagne and networking with people they think are important. Oh, it gets better, Sophie continued, consulting her tablet as we slid into the back seat of the Mercedes. They registered 3 weeks ago. Used Bella's maiden name on the registration, probably why it didn't flag in our system. And according to their social media, which I may or may not have been monitoring, they've been posting about this exclusive industry event they're attending. Very excited. Many hashtags. The car pulled smoothly into Manhattan traffic, which on a Friday evening was its usual nightmare of gridlock and aggressive horn honking, but somehow felt less stressful when you were sitting in leather seats with a driver who actually knew what he was doing. I looked out the window at the city sliding by, yellow cabs, food trucks, tourists taking selfies, professionals in suits rushing somewhere important, the organized chaos that made New York, New York. And rising above it all, literally and figuratively, were the billboards. My billboards. We passed one on the FDR Drive. Massive, probably 40 feet tall, impossible to miss. The Skyframe Systems logo glowed against a deep blue background that faded into an image of a jet cutting through clouds. Below it, in clean, modern typography, Skyframe Systems, the future of flight. Then another one on Lexington Avenue, as we cut through Midtown. This one featured a sleek visualization of our platform's interface, all clean lines and intuitive design, with the tagline, transforming aviation, one flight at a time. And another on Times Square, right in the heart of the tourist madness. Our logo displayed alongside the conference information, Global Logistics Tech Summit, sponsored by Skyframe Systems. Sophie noticed me looking and smiled. The marketing team went all out. We've got placements in 4 airports, 6 major highways, and every major transit hub in the tri-state area. If you're traveling anywhere in the Northeast this week, you're seeing our name. A funny thought hit me. One of those moments of perfect irony that made me appreciate just how completely the tables had turned. 2 years ago, just 24 months, Bella had mocked me for designing fancy airplane software. Those were her exact words, said with that particular tone of dismissive amusement, like I was a kid playing with Lincoln Logs instead of an adult building an actual business. It's just fancy airplane software, Leo, she'd said, scrolling through her phone while I tried to explain the market opportunity. How many people actually need that? I tried to explain that the private and corporate aviation industry was worth billions, that it was growing exponentially, that the existing systems were outdated and inefficient, that I'd identified a genuine gap in the market. She'd just shrugged and gone back to Instagram. Now that fancy airplane software was running the navigation and logistics systems for half the corporate jets in North America. It was processing thousands of flight plans daily. It was saving companies millions in operational costs. And yeah, it was making me wealthy enough to own my own jet. Karma, I thought, staring at another billboard as we passed, really does have a first-class seat. Actually, forget first class. Karma had its own private jet, and it was landing right on top of people who deserved it. You seem contemplative, Sophie observed, tapping something on her tablet. Nervous about the keynote? Not even a little bit, I said, which was true. Public speaking had never bothered me, probably because I genuinely cared about what I was talking about. It's easy to be confident when you're not selling snake oil or trying to convince people that your mediocre product is revolutionary. I'd built something real, something valuable, and I was just going to tell people about it. Good, she said, because the press is very interested in you. Forbes wants an interview. TechCrunch is doing a feature. And apparently Bloomberg is calling you the dark horse of aviation tech because you came out of nowhere. I hadn't come out of nowhere. I'd come out of 2 years of grinding work that people had dismissed as a vanity project. But I understood what they meant. I'd kept a relatively low profile, focusing on building the business rather than building my personal brand. While other tech CEOs were posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn and doing podcast tours, I'd been actually working. The car pulled up to the Peninsula Hotel, where I'd be staying for the weekend. Not because I needed the luxury, though the rooms were admittedly spectacular, but because it was hosting the conference and it made logistical sense. Plus, the view of Fifth Avenue from the suites was pretty incredible. You've got about 90 minutes before you need to be at the venue, Sophie said as the driver opened my door. Hair and makeup will meet you in your suite in 45. Your tux is already pressed and hanging in the closet. Speech is loaded on the teleprompter, but you've got the notes on your phone if you want to review. You're terrifyingly efficient, you know that? I said, grabbing my bag. That's why you pay me the big bucks, she shot back. Also, I took the liberty of having a bottle of Macallan 25 sent to your room. Figured you might want to toast the moment before you go out there and blow their minds. I grinned. This is why you're the best. I know. See you at the venue. And Leo. She paused, her expression shifting from professional to genuinely pleased. Enjoy this. You earned it. The suite was exactly what you'd expect from a hotel that regularly hosted heads of state and celebrities trying to avoid paparazzi. Spacious, elegantly appointed, with that particular kind of understated luxury that whispers rather than shouts. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan at dusk, the city starting to light up as the sun set behind the buildings. I poured myself a finger of the Macallan, neat, and stood at the window, watching the city pulse with energy below. Somewhere out there, probably at LaGuardia or JFK, Bella, Clara, and Harold were landing. They'd collect their luggage from baggage claim, fight for a taxi, or deal with an overpriced Uber, sit in traffic for an hour to get to whatever hotel they'd booked. Probably something nice, but not quite peninsula-level nice. They'd check in, freshen up, probably take some photos in their hotel room to post on Instagram. Hashtag NYC life, hashtag business travel, hashtag living my best life. Then they'd head to the conference venue, excited to network, to be seen, to post photos of themselves at this exclusive industry event. And they'd have no idea that the name they kept seeing everywhere, on the banners, on the promotional materials, on the badges, on those billboards they'd passed on their way in, was mine. My phone buzzed. A text from Grant. Perimeter secured at venue. Press is setting up. Security briefing complete. Ready when you are, sir. Another text from Sophie. Hair and makeup in the lobby. Sending them up now. Also, the conference organizers want to know if you prefer sparkling or still water at the podium. I typed back, still. Thanks. Then I opened my photos and scrolled back to one from 2 years ago. Me in my tiny home office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in diagrams and code, looking exhausted but determined. I'd asked Bella to take it because I wanted to document the beginning, wanted to remember what it felt like to start from zero. She'd taken the photo reluctantly, made a comment about how I looked obsessed and crazy. then went back to watching reality TV in the living room. I looked at that photo now, at the exhausted face of a guy who was betting everything on an idea that most people thought was doomed to fail, and I silently saluted him. "We did it, man," I whispered to the younger version of myself. "We actually did it." There was a knock at the door, hair and makeup, right on schedule. I downed the rest of my whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and smiled at my reflection in the window. Tonight was going to be one for the books, and Bella, Clara, and Harold had front row seats to their own humiliation. Showtime. The Javits Center at night is something else. All glass and steel and lights, looking like someone built a spaceship in the middle of Manhattan and just decided to host events in it. The Global Logistics Tech Summit had taken over the entire North Pavilion, and as my car pulled up to the entrance, I could see the banners hanging from the ceiling. Massive things, probably 30 feet long, with the Skyframe Systems logo prominently displayed alongside the conference branding. The red carpet, because apparently tech conferences had adopted Hollywood's playbook, stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with photographers, videographers, and journalists with recording devices. Overhead lights created that artificial daylight glow that makes everything look more dramatic than it actually is. It was the kind of setup that screamed, "Important people are here," which I guess was accurate, even if it felt a little over the top. Grant was waiting by the door, earpiece in, looking every bit the professional security director. He gave me a subtle nod as I stepped out of the car, which I learned was his way of saying, "Everything's good, no threats, you're clear to proceed." 2 years of working together had developed its own shorthand. But before I could even take 3 steps toward the entrance, they descended. The press, like a flock of very well-dressed vultures who'd spotted fresh meat. Cameras started flashing, creating this strobe effect that would have been disorienting if I hadn't been expecting it. Microphones appeared out of nowhere, thrust toward my face by reporters who'd clearly had their coffee and were ready for sound bites. "Mr. Donovan. Mr. Donovan." A woman from what looked like a major tech publication pushed to the front. "Is it true your company just acquired Sky Global Airways? Can you confirm the rumors?" That. The acquisition had been in the works for 3 months, confidential until about 48 hours ago, when some analyst with too much time and too many industry connections had figured it out and leaked it to the trades. Sky Global was a regional carrier, nothing huge, but it represented vertical integration, owning not just the software, but the actual aviation operation. It was a chess move that had made my competitors very nervous and my investors very happy. I stopped, smiled at the reporter, and said, "Let's just say I like owning the places I was once told I couldn't afford." The reporters ate that up. I could practically see them mentally drafting their headlines: "Tech Entrepreneur's Revenge Acquisition," or some variation thereof. More questions came flying at me. What's next for Skyframe? Are the IPO rumors true? How does it feel to be called the youngest self-made CEO in aviation tech? I answered a few more, keeping it professional but personable, giving them enough content to work with, but not so much that I'd have nothing left to say during the actual keynote. This was the dance of modern business. You had to feed the media machine without letting it consume you entirely. Sophie appeared at my elbow, perfectly timed as always. "Mr. Donovan, they're ready for you inside." I gave the press a final wave and headed through the doors into the venue proper. The cocktail reception was already in full swing. Probably 300 people in business formal attire, holding champagne flutes and small plates of appetizers that looked too pretty to eat. Networking with that particular intensity that comes from knowing everyone in the room might be useful to you someday. The space was stunning. Whoever had designed it understood drama. The ceiling was draped in fabric that changed colors slowly. Deep blues fading into purples, then into golds. Our logo was projected onto multiple surfaces, impossible to miss. Sleek white furniture created conversation areas. Bars at each corner ensured nobody's glass stayed empty for long. And the people, CEOs of major aviation companies, CTOs from Fortune 500s, venture capitalists, industry analysts, journalists from every major publication, government officials from the FAA. This wasn't just a tech conference. This was the who's who of aviation, logistics, and technology, all gathered in one place. And I'd built the thing they all came to talk about. I worked the room for about 20 minutes, shaking hands, making small talk, having conversations that would probably lead to contracts or partnerships down the line. Everyone wanted a moment, wanted to tell me about their company, wanted to explore potential synergies. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. That's when I saw them. Bella, Clara, and Harold, standing near one of the bars, looking simultaneously impressed and overwhelmed. They were dressed up. Clara in some designer dress that probably cost more than a used car, Bella in a cocktail dress I recognized from her Instagram posts, Harold in a suit that was nice, but somehow still made him look like he was trying too hard. They had their conference badges around their necks, marking them as general attendees rather than VIPs or press. They were scanning the room, clearly trying to spot someone important to network with, completely oblivious to the fact that the most important person in the building was standing 30 feet away, watching them with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. Bella said something to Clara, who laughed and pulled out her phone, probably to take pictures for social media. Harold was already working on his second drink, which tracked with his usual behavior at open bar events. I could have approached them then, could have walked up and watched their faces shift from confusion to recognition to horror. But that would have been too easy, too quick. I wanted them to figure it out slowly, wanted the realization to dawn on them in the most public, most undeniable way possible. Sophie touched my arm. 5 minutes to showtime. They want you backstage. I nodded, taking one last look at my in-laws, blissfully unaware of what was about to happen, and followed Sophie toward the main ballroom. The ballroom was massive, easily seating for 1,000 people, all facing a stage that looked like it belonged at TED Talks. Massive screens flanked both sides, currently displaying the conference logo and the evening's agenda. The lighting was professional grade. The sound system was probably worth more than my first apartment, and the energy in the room was electric. People were still filing in, finding their seats, checking their phones one last time before the program started. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, clients, partners, competitors who'd probably come to see what all the fuss was about. I was backstage now, in the wings where the speakers waited before their moment in the spotlight. A production assistant with a headset was doing checks, making sure everyone knew their cue times. The conference organizer, a woman named Patricia who'd been emailing me for 6 months about this event, appeared with a huge smile. Mr. Donovan, so thrilled you could make it. Are you ready? Do you need anything? Water? The teleprompter is set, but I have your slides pulled up just in case you want to. Patricia, I interrupted gently. I'm good. Let's do this. She beamed, clearly relieved that I wasn't one of those high-maintenance speakers who needed their MNMS sorted by color or whatever. Fantastic. You're on in 2 minutes. You'll hear the introduction, then you walk out stage right. The spotlight will find you. Take your time, on the moment. I could hear the crowd settling in the ballroom, the ambient chatter dropping as people realized the program was about to start. Through a gap in the curtain, I could see the front rows, and there they were. Bella, Clara, and Harold, seated about 10 rows back, slightly off to the left. They'd scored decent seats, probably arrived early to make sure they could see everything. Oh, they were going to see everything all right. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, that particular kind of anticipatory silence that happens right before something big. A single spotlight illuminated the podium at center stage. The announcer's voice, deep, authoritative, the kind of voice that demanded attention, boomed through the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony of the Global Logistics Tech Summit. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from a true innovator, a visionary who has transformed the aviation technology landscape in just 2 short years. His company, Skyframe Systems, has revolutionized how we think about flight operations, logistics, and the future of aviation. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, the founder and CEO of Skyframe Systems, Mr. Leo Donovan. The applause started immediately, building like a wave. The spotlight swung from the podium to stage right, finding me in the wings. This was it. I stepped out onto that stage, and the applause got louder. I could see faces in the crowd, some I recognized, many I didn't, all of them looking up at me with interest, attention, respect. And I could see Bella's wine glass slip from her fingers. Even from the stage, even with the spotlight in my eyes, I could see it happen in slow motion. The glass tumbled, spilling red wine down the front of her dress before shattering on the floor. Her face went absolutely white, like all the blood had just drained out of her body and pooled somewhere around her designer heels. Clara's jaw literally dropped. Not metaphorically. I mean, her mouth actually fell open in that cartoon character way that you don't think happens in real life until you witness it firsthand. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto her lap. And Harold. Oh, Harold. The man looked like someone had just told him that his entire investment portfolio had been revealed as a Ponzi scheme. His face cycled through about 6 different shades of red before settling on a kind of grayish purple that probably meant his blood pressure had just spiked to dangerous levels. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, and let the applause die down naturally. The screens on either side of the stage came to life, displaying my photo alongside the Skyframe Systems logo and the company's key achievements over the past 2 years. The ballroom was silent now, 1,000 people waiting to hear what I had to say. I smiled, genuine, confident, maybe with just a hint of the satisfaction I was feeling, and began. 2 years ago, I said, my voice carrying easily through the excellent sound system, I was told I wasn't good enough to sit in first class. Pause. Let that land. So I built my own airline instead. The laughter started, surprised, delighted, the kind of laughter that comes from people who appreciate a good underdog story. The applause built again, this time with energy, with enthusiasm. I could see Bella frantically trying to dab at the wine stain on her dress with a napkin. Clara was frozen, staring at me like I was a ghost who'd just materialized at her dinner table. Harold had his phone out, probably Googling my name right then and there, trying to figure out how he'd missed this. And I was just getting started. The keynote went exactly as planned. 20 minutes of vision, innovation, and carefully crafted sound bites that would make excellent quotes for the tech blogs covering the event. I talked about the future of aviation, about democratizing technology, about building something meaningful instead of just chasing profit margins. The audience ate it up, giving me a standing ovation that lasted long enough to feel genuinely gratifying rather than just polite. But the real show started after I stepped off that stage. The reception area had transformed into a networking frenzy, everyone wanting to shake my hand, exchange business cards, pitch me their ideas, or just be seen talking to me. It's funny how success makes you instantly more interesting to people who wouldn't have given you the time of day 2 years ago. I worked through the crowd with practiced efficiency, Sophie running interference when needed, until I saw Bella approaching. She moved cautiously, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt or attack. The wine stain on her dress had been mostly cleaned up, but you could still see the faint outline if you knew to look for it. Her expression was carefully neutral, probably practiced in the bathroom mirror before she built up the courage to come find me. Leo, she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled, keeping my tone pleasant, conversational, like we were discussing weekend plans instead of the complete demolition of her worldview. Because you would have told Clara. It was a simple statement of fact, and we both knew it was true. Bella couldn't keep a secret from her sister if her life depended on it. Everything was content for their group chat, fodder for their endless phone calls, material for their matching Instagram stories. Clara materialized beside her sister, apparently having decided that safety in numbers was the way to go. She was trying to maintain that superior smirk, but it kept faltering, like a mask that didn't quite fit anymore. You just got lucky, she said, but there was no conviction behind it. It sounded like something she felt obligated to say rather than something she actually believed. I took a sip of my champagne, the good stuff, not the cheap Prosecco they were serving at the general bars, and looked at her directly. Sure, Clara. Luck looks great with 120-hour work weeks, 3 years of 14-hour days, and building something from absolutely nothing. Super lucky. She didn't have a response to that. What could she say? That inheriting your lifestyle from your parents' money and marrying someone with a trust fund took just as much work? We both knew the truth. Harold appeared then, completing the dysfunctional family reunion. He looked older somehow, like the past hour had aged him. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by something that almost looked like humility, though I suspected it was actually just shock that hadn't fully processed yet. Leo, he said, and actually had the decency to sound somewhat ashamed. We underestimated you. Finally, someone was stating the obvious. I could have been gracious about it, could have accepted the half apology with humility and moved on like the bigger person. But you know what? I'd spent 2 years being the bigger person while they made me feel like I was 2 feet tall. No, I corrected, my voice calm but firm. You just overestimated yourselves. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't anger speaking. It was simple truth, delivered without malice, but without sugarcoating either. They'd built their entire sense of superiority on foundations that were never as solid as they thought, and now those foundations were crumbling in real time. It wasn't revenge that drove my words, not really. It was amusement. The pure, uncomplicated amusement of watching people who'd spent years mocking my ambition, now desperately wanting to be part of my success story. The same people who'd laughed at my projects, now wanted photos with me for their LinkedIn profiles, wanted to tell their friends they knew me back when, wanted to retroactively claim they'd always believed in me. A photographer from Forbes approached, asking if I'd pose for a quick shot. Harold immediately straightened his tie, Clara fixed her hair, and Bella moved closer to me. All three of them preparing to jump into the frame like this was a normal family photo opportunity. The photographer looked at me questioningly, and I gave him the slightest shake of my head. Just me, I said pleasantly. Thanks though. I walked away to take the photo, leaving the three of them standing there in their awkward cluster, finally understanding what it felt like to not be included, to be dismissed, to watch someone else's success from the outside looking in. And it felt absolutely perfect. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and guests mingled over their third or fourth drinks, Bella found me one last time. The desperation in her eyes was almost painful to watch, like she was realizing in real time just how badly she'd miscalculated everything. I was wrong, she said, her voice cracking slightly. You were always destined for more. I see that now. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, just a calm, settled emptiness where our relationship used to be. I know, I said simply. I just didn't realize you weren't coming along for the flight. She blinked, processing. You're still bitter? No, Bella. I'm upgraded. The word hung between us, carrying more weight than she probably understood. I wasn't talking about seat assignments anymore. I was talking about my entire life, my perspective, my standards. I'd upgraded everything, and she was still stuck on the tarmac wondering what happened. Clara whispered something to Harold nearby, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. Is he serious? Harold muttered back, looking defeated, deadly. Sophie approached with perfect timing. Your jet's ready for departure, sir. This time, nobody laughed. Back aboard the jet, the cabin lights dimmed to a comfortable glow. Grant saluted as I settled into my seat. Back to LA, sir? I looked out at the Manhattan skyline, the city lights twinkling like a million tiny stars scattered across the darkness. Back to peace. As the engines powered up and we lifted off, climbing smoothly through the night sky, I thought about that morning at Terminal 3. The laughter, the mockery, the casual cruelty of people who'd convinced themselves they were better than me. And then the moment, that beautiful, perfect moment, when they realized they'd been wrong the entire time. I sipped my espresso, watching the city shrink beneath us, and smiled at my own reflection in the window. Some people measure success by ticket class, I said quietly to myself. I measure it by altitude. Outside, the jet soared through the clouds, smooth, quiet, untouchable. We climbed higher and higher until even the lights of New York disappeared below us, leaving only stars above and darkness below. And that was the funny part, the cosmic joke that made everything worth it. They'd wanted first class. I'd built my own sky.